The railway station was built to serve the city. That is the accepted explanation. The population grew, commerce expanded, passengers multiplied, and so the infrastructure was constructed to meet that demand. It is a logical sequence. It is the sequence that appears in virtually every official account of 19th-century urban development across Europe and North America. But here is where the numbers become uncomfortable. In 1850, the city of St. Louis had approximately 77,000 residents. The station built to serve them, Union Station, completed in 1894, was designed with a train shed spanning over 11.5 acres. It was, at the time of its opening, the largest and busiest railway terminal in the world. Not in the region. Not in the country. In the world. A structure of that magnitude for a city of that size, built not at the peak of its population but at a moment when the city was still, by modern standards, relatively modest. This video explores historical interpretations and unanswered questions found in existing records. It does not present definitive conclusions. But the question, the simple, structural question, is worth holding on to. When you build the world's largest terminal for a mid-sized city, what exactly were you anticipating? Let's stay with the basics for a moment, because the official framework is important to understand before anything else is examined. The Industrial Revolution, historians tell us, catalyzed an unprecedented movement of people. Rural populations migrated toward urban centers. Commerce demanded speed. The steam engine compressed geography. Railways were therefore built to facilitate this movement. Reactive infrastructure, constructed in response to existing or immediately foreseeable need. The logic is sound. The pattern on its surface holds. Except when you begin measuring the gap between the population present at the time of construction and the scale of the structure built to serve it. Washington, D.C. Union Station opened in 1907. The city's population at that time was approximately 278,000 people. The station was built with a main hall, the main concourse, that measures 96 feet in height and stretches over 200 feet in length. The ceiling alone is one of the largest barrel-vaulted ceilings in the world. The building's footprint covers 200,000 square feet. It was, and remains, one of the most structurally imposing civic buildings in the United States. For 278,000 people. That's a city roughly the size of present-day Madison, Wisconsin. Imagine Madison, Wisconsin opening a station the size of a Roman basilica. The instinct at this point is to offer an explanation. And there are several. Civic ambition. The Beaux-Arts architectural movement. A desire to project national prestige. Railroad companies with capital to spend. These are real factors and they appear consistently in academic literature on the period. But explanations and observations are not the same thing. The explanation does not dissolve the observation. It redirects it. Because civic ambition does not fully account for structural choices. When you build a ceiling 96 feet high, you are not merely making an aesthetic gesture. You are making an engineering commitment. The foundation depth, the load-bearing requirements, the ventilation systems, the internal volume, all of it is calibrated to manage a flow of people that, at the time of construction, did not yet exist. That is the specific detail that bears examination. Not that the buildings are grand. Grandeur is subjective. The detail is that the internal volumes, the calculated capacities, the flow systems, the structural tolerances, consistently exceed the populations they were ostensibly built to serve, often by margins that standard civic ambition does not cleanly explain. Philadelphia's Broad Street Station, demolished in 1953, was described by contemporaries as a structure of almost bewildering scale. Its train shed, at the time of construction in the 1880s, was among the largest single-span iron structures ever built. The city's population in 1880 was just under 850,000. Not a small city, but the station's internal capacity and structural ambition were both calibrated well beyond what 850,000 urban commuters would require. The same pattern appears in Chicago's early Union Station iterations and Cincinnati's Union Terminal, which opened in 1933 during the Great Depression, of all economic moments, and was built with a rotunda dome that rises 106 feet and a facade stretching 486 feet across. and in smaller, less examined cities across the American Midwest. Cincinnati in 1933 had a population of approximately 451,000. A 106-foot rotunda. Built during the worst economic contraction in American history. There is a rhythm to anomalies. A single outlier is a curiosity. Two outliers invite a hypothesis. Three or more, distributed across regions, begin to suggest something that simple coincidence does not efficiently explain. That something need not be dramatic. It need not be hidden or conspiratorial. It may be entirely mundane, a set of engineering assumptions, a planning doctrine, a financial model that prioritized long-term capacity over short-term proportionality. But what is that doctrine? Where is it written? Who codified it? The historical record is surprisingly quiet on this point. What we have instead is the physical evidence. Stations built across the 19th and early 20th centuries, in cities of varying sizes, across multiple continents, that share a consistent tendency toward over-preparation, toward structural capacity that anticipates a future population that, in many cases, never fully arrived, or arrived decades later than the infrastructure implied they would. In some cities, the populations grew into their stations. In others, the stations were quietly downsized, repurposed, or demolished entirely, their original scale quietly acknowledged as having been, somehow, excessive. Excessive for what, exactly? Historians of architecture will note that many of these stations drew from a common design tradition. The Beaux-Arts school, trained at the École des Beaux-Arts in Paris, which emphasized monumentality, symmetry, and civic grandeur as expressions of cultural aspiration. That is accurate. The stylistic lineage is well documented. But style does not determine structural volume. A Beaux-Arts building can be modest in scale. Many are. The choice to build 96-foot ceilings, 11-acre train sheds, and 486-foot facades is not a stylistic requirement. It is a capacity decision. And capacity decisions are, by definition, anticipatory. The question that lingers at the edge of the official account is not whether these buildings are beautiful, or whether the architects were talented, or whether the railroads had money to invest. The question is simpler than any of those. What were they building toward? The pattern, once noticed, does not stay contained. That is perhaps the most structurally significant thing about it. If the over-preparation observed in American railway stations were limited to one region or one decade, or one railway company with unusually deep pockets, the explanation would be straightforward. Corporate excess. Regional pride. An anomaly of financing. But the pattern does not stay in one place. It does not respect national borders or economic conditions, or the standard logic of supply meeting demand. It moves. And when a pattern moves consistently across unconnected geographies, the explanations that work for individual cases begin to strain under the collective weight. Consider England. Manchester's London Road Station, today known as Piccadilly, was substantially rebuilt in the 1860s. Manchester at that time was a city transformed by the cotton trade, dense with mill workers and commercial traffic. The industrial demand was real. The population pressure was genuine. And yet the station's original iron and glass train shed, constructed during this period, was engineered to a scale that contemporary passenger volumes did not require. The shed's span, its load tolerances, its platform configurations, all of it implied a volume of daily movement that Manchester, even at the height of its industrial period, would only approach decades later. Newcastle Central Station, opened in 1850, presents a similar geometry. The city's population in 1850 was approximately 88,000. The station's curving, triple-arch train shed, one of the most structurally complex roof systems built in Britain at that point, was designed with an internal capacity that its opening day passenger numbers did not come close to filling. 88,000 people. A triple-arched iron canopy of cathedral proportions. The instinct, again, is to reach for explanation. And again, the explanations are available. Victorian engineers, it is said, built for the future. They anticipated growth. They had learned from earlier, underscaled structures that required expensive retrofitting, and so they overcorrected toward abundance. This is plausible. It is cited frequently. But building for the future, is not a doctrine without limits. Engineers and financiers operate within capital constraints. Every additional foot of span, every additional platform, every additional structural bay represents a cost incurred in the present for a return projected into the future. That calculation is not made casually. It requires a specific belief about what the future holds, a belief specific enough and confident enough to justify the expenditure. So the question becomes, what were these engineers across multiple countries, multiple railway companies, multiple decades actually anticipating? What data informed their projections? What population models justified the scale? Those models, where they exist at all in the historical record, are sparse. Bristol Temple Meads, designed by Isambard Kingdom Brunel and opened in 1840, is one of the oldest surviving railway terminals in the world. Brunel's original structure was built for a city whose railway passenger base was, in 1840, essentially hypothetical. The Great Western Railway had only just connected Bristol to London. The culture of railway travel was nascent. And yet the building Brunel designed was not a provisional structure, not a transitional terminal intended to be replaced once demand materialized. It was a permanent statement. The mock medieval hammer beam roof. The wide, unobstructed interior. The scale that implied not a city discovering a new technology, but a city already fluent in a transportation culture that did not yet widely exist. Bristol's population in 1840 was approximately 140,000. The station Brunel built feels even now like it was designed for something considerably larger. Shift geography entirely. Move to the American Midwest, where the industrial logic that explains British overpreparation becomes harder to apply. Kansas City's Union Station, completed in 1914, is the third largest railway station in the United States. Kansas City's population in 1914 was approximately 248,000. The station's Great Hall, its central waiting room, stretches 299 feet in length, 92 feet in width, and rises to a ceiling 95 feet above the floor. It contains 3 massive chandeliers, each weighing over a ton, for 248,000 people. In a city that was, by any reasonable measure, still in early development. The comparison that keeps surfacing, the one that is difficult to dismiss, is not between these stations and smaller buildings. It is between these stations and the cities themselves. The ratio is consistently, almost uniformly, inverted. The infrastructure presents as if the city has already arrived at a scale it has not yet reached. Infrastructure before population. Capacity before demand. In Louisville, Kentucky, the original Union Station opened in 1891 with a clock tower rising 180 feet above street level. The city's population was approximately 161,000. In Columbus, Ohio, Union Station, demolished in 1976, featured a waiting room with a 150-foot ceiling and a facade described by the Columbus Dispatch at the time of demolition as built for a city twice its size. In Indianapolis, the 1888 Union Station was designed with a train shed covering 197,000 square feet, for a city of approximately 105,000 residents. 105,000 residents. A train shed nearly 5 acres in size. What makes this pattern pressure-bearing is not any single example. It is the consistency of the ratio. Across different architects, different railway companies, different cities, different decades, the proportion between population size and structural scale follows a trajectory that standard demand response logic does not cleanly produce. And the consistency extends beyond scale into something subtler, the quality of finish. These stations were not merely large. They were finished to a standard that implied permanence, institutional weight, and civic certainty. The marble floors, the coffered ceilings, the bronze fixtures. These are not the choices of engineers hedging their bets. These are the choices of builders who believed, with unusual confidence, that the future they were building toward was not speculative, that it was, in some sense, already known. In recent years, a loose collection of researchers, amateur historians, and online communities have begun grouping these observations. The scale mismatches, the premature monumentality, the consistency across regions, under a broader interpretive framework. It is a framework that mainstream historians largely do not engage with, and which academic institutions have not formally examined. But the grouping itself is interesting. Not because it provides answers, it does not, but because it suggests that the discomfort these patterns produce is not isolated. That other people looking at the same measurements, the same population records, the same structural capacities, have arrived at a similar sensation. That something about the official sequence, demand, then supply, does not quite fit what the buildings themselves appear to record. What that framework is called, and what it proposes, is where the examination becomes considerably more complicated. The word is Tartaria. It appears in online forums, in amateur research threads, in YouTube comment sections and independent documentary channels. It is spoken with varying degrees of certainty, sometimes as hypothesis, sometimes as conviction, sometimes as a question that its speaker cannot quite fully form. It is not a term found in mainstream academic syllabi. It is not a designation that appears in peer-reviewed architectural history. And yet it keeps surfacing with increasing frequency wherever these patterns of structural overpreparation are discussed. Understanding what the term actually means, and what it does not mean, requires some precision. In legitimate historical cartography, Tartaria or Tartary was a geographic designation used on European maps from roughly the 13th through the 18th centuries. It referred, broadly and imprecisely, to the vast interior regions of Asia, the steppes, the Siberian expanse, the territories east of the Caspian Sea and north of Persia that European cartographers knew existed but had not systematically explored. It was not a political entity in the modern sense. Not a unified empire with a capital and a succession of rulers. It was a cartographic placeholder, a name applied to a space that European geographic knowledge had not yet filled with more specific detail. That is the documented, archival meaning of the word. What the online framework proposes is something considerably different, and considerably more difficult to evaluate. Within the interpretive community that uses the term, Tartaria is proposed not as a cartographic label but as evidence of a prior civilization, one of significant architectural and infrastructural sophistication, whose existence has been either inadequately recorded or systematically omitted from the historical account we currently use. Proponents of this framework point to the railway stations, to the civic buildings, to the wide urban boulevards and ornate municipal structures of the 19th century, and suggest that these were not built by the civilizations that history credits with their construction. They were, in this interpretation, inherited remnants or continuations of a building tradition that predates the Industrial Revolution by an unknown margin. This is the interpretive claim. It is stated here not as fact, not as likelihood, but as the framework itself presents it. The appropriate response to that claim is not immediate dismissal, and it is not acceptance. It is examination. What does mainstream architectural history say about these buildings? The consensus account is well established. The 19th century saw an unprecedented convergence of factors. Industrialized iron and steel production that made large-span structures economically viable for the first time. A Beaux-Arts design tradition that valorized monumental civic architecture as an expression of national and commercial confidence. Railway companies with access to significant capital and a competitive incentive to project permanence and stability, and a genuine, if sometimes overstated, belief among planners and engineers that urban populations would continue to grow indefinitely. These are real factors. They are documented. They explain a great deal. What they explain less efficiently is the consistency of the ratio, the fact that the gap between population size and structural capacity appears not as an occasional outlier but as a recurring feature across regions, decades, and entirely separate institutional actors. Mainstream history accounts for individual monuments. It is somewhat quieter on why the pattern recurs so reliably. Some researchers who engage seriously with the anomalies, without adopting the full Tartaria interpretive framework, have proposed intermediate explanations. One suggestion is that 19th century planners operated from demographic models that proved systematically over-optimistic. Projections that anticipated urbanization rates far exceeding what actually occurred, producing infrastructure calibrated to populations that never fully materialized. This would explain the scale without requiring any revision of the historical timeline. Another interpretation focuses on what might be called institutional signaling. Railway companies, municipal governments, and national administrations may have deliberately overbuilt as a form of credibility projection, communicating to investors, to rival cities, and to international observers that a given location was a serious, permanent, and growing center of commerce. The building was not primarily for its users. It was a message directed outward. Scale as rhetoric. A third interpretation, less frequently discussed in academic contexts, notes that the demolition rate of these structures is itself an interesting data point. A significant number of the stations examined in this documentary no longer exist. Cincinnati's Union Terminal survived by conversion to a museum. Others were not so fortunate. Detroit's Michigan Central Station stood vacant and deteriorating for decades. Philadelphia's Broad Street Station was demolished entirely. Kansas City's Union Station came within years of the same fate. One interpretation of the demolitions is straightforward. The buildings became economically unviable as car culture displaced railway travel. That is accurate. Another interpretation simply notes that the buildings being removed were, in many cases, the same buildings whose scale raised the questions we have been examining. What is made of that observation depends entirely on the interpretive framework one brings to it. The Tartaria framework, as it circulates online, is not a single unified theory. It exists in multiple versions with varying degrees of evidential rigor and varying claims about what exactly is being proposed. Some versions are mild, suggesting only that the historical record of 19th century construction is incomplete, and that questions about the origins of certain building traditions deserve more serious academic attention. Others are more dramatic, proposing timelines that conflict sharply with established archaeology and geology, or suggesting coordinated institutional suppression of evidence. The mild version is, in principle, the kind of question that historical research is designed to address. Gaps in the record are real. Institutional biases in what gets preserved and what gets demolished are documented phenomena. The history of architecture, like all history, is written with omissions. The more dramatic versions encounter a significant evidentiary problem. Extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence, and the physical evidence available, the stations themselves, the population records, the engineering documents, does not, on its own, support conclusions about prior civilizations or deliberate erasure. It supports, at most, the observation that something about the standard sequence is imprecise. Imprecision is not conspiracy. Unanswered questions are not proof of hidden answers. What remains at the end of this examination is not a conclusion. It is a set of measurements, a set of ratios. A recurring pattern that appears in St. Louis and Washington and Bristol and Newcastle and Kansas City and Cincinnati, in buildings constructed by different hands, in different decades, funded by different institutions, for cities of different sizes and different economic profiles. The buildings are still there. Some of them. The ceilings are still 96 feet high. The train sheds still span acres. The bronze fixtures are still in place in the stations that survived. They were built to a scale that their recorded populations did not require. The official explanations are real and partial and not entirely sufficient. The alternative interpretations range from the plausible to the extraordinary. And somewhere in the space between what the records say was built and what appears to have been anticipated in the building of it, there is a question that the structures themselves continue to hold, quietly, permanently, in the proportions of things that were made, it seems, for more than what was there. For something that, by the available record, had not yet arrived. Or perhaps, depending on which interpretation you find most coherent, something that was no longer there at all.